correctly with the correct amount.
D20 Radio, where gamers roll.
www.d20radio.com.
Welcome to Me and Steve Talk RPGs, a podcast where me and my friend Steve try and help you get the most out of your role-playing game experience. Hey, Gamer Nation, what's up? Welcome back to Me and Steve. We're here tonight. It's me and my buddy Steve.
Hey, folks.
And tonight we're gonna talk about something we haven't actually addressed yet. But before that, what's our podcast of the week this week, Steve?
Podcast of the week is Tabletop Tales.
Ooh, they're good. I like them.
Yeah, I really liked it. They got a good show going on over there.
Yeah, they've got the What Comes After campaign is now into, well, campaign 2, actually, which is a neat kind of post-apocalyptic New England setting. And I think they still have their Star Wars game going as well.
Yeah, I'm thinking that Star Wars game's still going. That's a good one, too.
Yeah, it has been very entertaining. So if you're interested in checking them out, just search Tabletop Tales on your podcatcher of choice or check out anchor.fm/whatcomesafter DAS.
Yeah.
No, what comes after ASDAS.
Yes. What comes after?
There'll be a link in the show notes. I don't know.
Yeah, just click the thing and the thing.
Yes, there'll be a link in the show notes because that's much easier than trying to read website links when you haven't prepped.
http://www. Anyways, so we're talking about combat this week, which is oddly something we haven't talked about before.
Yeah. It's surprising. I mean, we've mentioned it a little bit, but not kind of gone in depth on it. And it's an interesting topic, I think, for gaming because sometimes you have more narrative-focused games, sometimes you have more combat-focused games. But in my podcast listening, etc., I came across some interesting takes on it, and so I thought, maybe, hey, it's something worth talking about, so maybe we should have a conversation about it.
Yeah, well, it's something that if it's done right, and it's done really right, it's a lot of fun. If it's done wrong, it's boring as sin.
And I think the kicker to what you just said is that you can have the same game have both results depending on who's at the table.
Right. Oh, exactly.
And by that, I mean, you can run the same setup for two different tables, and one of them will love it, and the other one will hate it.
Yeah, I completely agree with that.
And I mean, some of that is, I mean, I guess broadly, there's two big ways to run combats, and that would be, theater of the mind versus minis and maps and all that stuff. But I think it goes deeper than that. And well, I'll just kick it off with the point that really made me think about this topic was I was listening to Ken and Robin talk about stuff, which is just it's a wonderful podcast and will make you think about lots and lots of things. But they were talking about ways to spice up F20 combat, and F20 being their term for D&D, Pathfinder, basically all the D20 driven fantasy games out there. And one of them made the point that combat in those types of games, the only person who is constantly involved is the GM.
Right.
And that, kind of made me, and essentially in saying that, that's where I've heard a lot of criticism of D&D on this because, well, okay, it's my turn. Now I can go do something for 20 minutes till it's my turn again. And yet so many people, combat is the thing they fixate on in games, and yet they'll also complain that, well, it's not my turn, so I'm going to play on my phone, whatever. And I don't know an answer to that, but it's just kind of an interesting thing where the thing you say you want is the thing that makes you check out in ways.
Yeah, I understand both sides of that, though. So let me just go ahead and jump into this. I think part of that boredom and being like, oh, I'm just going to check out until it's my turn is on the fault of the system, right? So I I talk about this a lot, but I was on TikTok the other day and I saw somebody bring up an argument about, oh, a bad DM is someone who doesn't shoot arrows or fire missiles at a monk who just got deflect missile. And I sort of disagree with that. And the reason I sort of disagree with that is because deflect missiles is only accurate if they're being fired directly at the monk. But why would it make sense for archers or a ranged attacker to be firing a missile at a target that is literally zip zapping around the field? Like, at their core, monks should not be stationary most of their turn. And so if you're watching a monk zip zap around the field, an archer is not going to be trying to track that target. They're going to be taking a target that's somebody easier, like the wizard who's stood in the same square for the past 10 turns. And so, in my opinion, I think deflect missiles, and this is just a thought in my mind, but I think deflect missiles, what you should do is if you're standing next to the wizard and the wizard's the one being targeted, say you're one square over, so, what are they, 5-foot squares?
In most, most grid systems.
So say you're one square over from that wizard, use your reaction and say, I step over and deflect the missile. Okay, that's a way to keep the person that has that ability. So the argument is that, oh, well, you're not letting the player that has that ability use it. Well, it's partially on the GM or DM, and it's partially on the player to set themselves up to use the ability, right?
Mm-hmm.
Put yourself in situations where you can use it. Put yourself in a place where you're literally stepping in front and going, I'm going to step in front of them and use deflect missile. Okay, cool. That's a really cool cinematic thing. And that's what heroic fantasy like Dungeons and Dragons does really well.
Now, I'm just curious because, I'm familiar with the ability on the surface, but is it actually rules as written? You can use that to,
No.
so to speak, step in front of an attack?
No, it is not.
Okay. I wasn't sure, but
that's, again, it's not rules as written, but thematically it makes sense.
Oh, I completely agree with you.
Like, thematically, the idea is that, oh, well, you're just zip zopping around the field and you just zip zop in front of an arrow and go woo and throw it right back at them like out of a kung fu movie.
Right. Well, see, I think there's a thing too where, like, okay, and to take that a step further, why would any combatant, if you just shot an arrow at someone and all of a sudden it came flying back at you, why the heck would you fire at that person again?
Exactly. But that's also goes to my point of, like, most monks, like, monk speed is a thing.
Mm-hmm.
Most monk builds are ridiculously fast. So again, why would somebody that's firing missiles be like, I'm going to target the thing that's running around the battlefield?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, I think we get our heads wrapped up in the fact that, like, Dungeons and Dragons is sort of, well, old video games based it off of Dungeons and Dragons, where it's your turn, my turn, their turn, his turn, their turn, my turn, your turn, and everybody stops. You know what I mean?
Right.
And you lose that dynamic of every piece is still moving, everybody's still doing things. The battlefield's a chaotic place. You lose that sense of, because time froze so I can take my turn. You lose that sort of idea of, like, okay, well, time didn't actually freeze so I can take my turn. Sorry, technical hiccup, folks. But you lose some of the dynamics and forget that it is supposed to be, like, when you're on a battlefield, and it talks about this in the books, but you lose that sense because it is turn-based. Combat takes 6 seconds a round? It's
That's written, yeah.
Yeah, so it's 10 rounds in 1 minute. Like, 1 minute's not a long period of time.
Right. Well, I think and this comes down to kind of the simulation emulation thing too, but yeah, like you said, a combat round is 6 seconds in Dungeons and Dragons, and most games are somewhere around that. I think Cyberpunk 2020 was 3. Some games don't define it, like Genesis. Others
Yeah,
say
but
it's 6 to 10 seconds. It
in 2020 it's 3, but you only get to do one thing.
right. But like you said, we've got this the way we play it at the table because that's kind of the way you almost have to just for the human brain to grasp it.
Well, so no, not everybody's talking over each other.
Right. And you can't simultaneously resolve it all. Is that yes, Bob goes, then Sally goes, then I go, then you go, whatever. And the thing that we're trying to emulate or simulate, depending on what, how you want to approach the game, is this swirling, everybody's moving around a little bit and swords are swinging and, axes and whatever else. And it's like, in my head, I try to remind myself that the single attack roll you get to make for that 6 seconds is not the only swing you have of your sword. It's more to represent in that time gap, you get, so to speak, one quality opening to actually strike a significant blow at your opponent.
Right.
And I've been guilty of this myself and probably will be in the future, that you describe your action is that one swing of the sword, not this, for lack of a better word, this bizarre deadly dance that's happening.
Yeah, and I think that's I can't say that it's a major fault on the system, but like Genesis, and I'll get into this. Genesis combat isn't great. It's kind of slow, it's kind of clunky. I mean, I love it, but it is kind of slow. It can kind of drag at times. But the dynamic initiative system
Mm-hmm.
allows for more of a feeling of an active battlefield.
Yeah, I think it also, by nature of that system working as it does with the slots, it also keeps everyone a little more tuned in as to what's going on because, well, maybe I should go next, and I have to be paying attention to know if I can build off this thing or will be better if.
Well, and it lets you set up fun things like, and I'll talk a little bit about this. Our recent Genesis game, not this week, but the week before, we had a whole combat session where we had everybody had gotten a jump on this creature, so everybody got one free maneuver. Well, one of the players chose the maneuver to aim. So I had taken my turn, I charged in, I attempted to punch the thing, I missed. And so in my missing, I had gotten an advantage. So in my advantage, I just sort of said, I make a grand gesture towards X player's character, sort of stepping back out of the way, knowing that they had aimed their gun at the thing we were trying to shoot or trying to damage. And so they were able to go, okay, now it's my turn because Steve made this grand gesture towards me. You know what I mean?
Right, right.
And it sets up this nice dynamic flow of like, I do this and then you do that and then the enemy's going to do this and then you're going to do that, you know.
It feels more, I don't know, whole table interactive. I don't know if that's the right way to say it.
Yeah, it feels like the whole table's engaged
Yes.
more than your I don't want to say standard, but D&D style combat.
Yeah. And yet it's still turn-based, which basically just makes it, what do you want to say, able to be parsed and played as a game as opposed to, like, yeah, okay, in a video game where you've got a computer processing all these inputs simultaneously, it can do that.
Yeah. Yeah, you can view multiple things and look at all these different directions and yeah,
But yeah, we can't do that sitting around a table with pens and paper or even playing online. It just doesn't.
it doesn't quite work out that way.
Yeah. And that's just part of how games work. I don't think it's a fault. It's just we can't all tell a story literally simultaneously.
Right. And I'm not really trying to dog on D&D. I think one of the things it actually does really well is its combat. It's a very good combat game. I think it's a little bit more of people lose the forest through the trees when they're running combat.
Yeah. Well, I think, then maybe do we want to talk or, think of some ways maybe to kind of spice it up if you are running a game that's got a more structured combat. I mean, like, and these are things that I think you could apply to a Genesis or whatever other.
I think the big thing, and this is a big thing with D&D, is that reactions, unless stated, are not a given thing. But I
Mhm.
think you should have. I think that's one of the house rules that I sort of run that I've stolen from Critical Role, because
What do you
Critical
mean?
Role does this. They do reactions. They do, like, in reaction to that, I'm going to try and do this.
Oh, you mean they actually use their reaction?
Right. Which, at its core, 5th edition, unless you have a skill that says it's a reaction, you don't get a reactionary turn.
Mhm.
There is no reaction turn unless you get a skill like dodge. You know what I mean?
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah. Okay. So you're saying that because I haven't listened to them since they started campaign 3, just because I haven't
Well,
gotten
I mean,
around
even
to it.
go to
But
campaign 2,
yeah.
there are things where, like, I'll use my reaction to do this,
Mhm.
and it's not necessarily just dodge. It's not necessarily just this or that or the other thing. It's using your reaction to do a skill that
Creatively.
creatively, correct.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
And I think that can keep you more engaged, because if you're just standing there and taking damage, you're going to be bored out of your mind. You're just like, oh, I don't have any option. I just got to stand here and eat this.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think that's what? Maybe that's part of it, right? Is you maybe need to spice it up a little bit to kind of, I don't want to say break the rules or even throw them out, but get a little creative with them. Like you said, have a reaction, be it you let that monk for the reaction reach in front of the person standing next to them to deflect an arrow or something. I mean,
Right.
but I think some of it too is like, I think sometimes, and this is going to depend a lot on your table and your preferred play style, you focus so much on it's combat. That means I have to do the most damage I can.
Oh, yeah.
That's a trap I know we all fall into at times.
Yeah. You lose you lose a lot of role playing in combat.
Yeah.
And that's why I try to do things that, like, I don't always do the right move, or I'm always thinking of how my character would react or what my character would do in this way or the other.
Hmm.
It's just like, what would my character do to, like I said, with the situation we were in with Genesis, my character missed completely. Like, it was 0 success and an advantage.
Hmm.
Like, and so it's like, well, I'm not going to hit the guy, but my character would do this grand gesture as a way of being like, all right, well, that was me. Here's somebody else. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
No, and sometimes I think remembering to role play is the fun part. I've been watching the Legend of Vox Machina, and it's reminding me of that campaign 1 of Critical Role, and Percy just doing things out of pure vengeance is
Hmm.
is fantastic. Like, it's a character role playing. It's a character role playing during a combat. Like,
Well, and see, this is too, and I won't point the finger exclusively at players in this either, because somewhere a lot of people get the idea that at combat, it's as the GM, you're trying to kill or at least inflict damage upon the players, and the players are trying to kill the bad guy. But I think sometimes, do you maybe spice it up by, be it, if you've got a table that has a lot of more tactical players, do you start, using tactics with your bad guys and moving and, like you said, you have the archers. Oh, where's the wizard? Okay, yeah, we're gonna, pop off from behind a tree, shoot at the wizard, and pop back in or whatever. That kind of thing. And I think so many times, I know I've seen it at tables I've played at with numerous different people, where, like, combat starts and you basically all line up in the middle of the room and just swing swords till someone falls down.
yeah, I've seen that too. I've been in those. I've played like that. It's the Conga-Line of doom.
I like that line, the Conga line of doom.
No, that was back in that was back in fourth edition. That was a fun thing you could do with rogues back in fourth edition. You could do the Conga-Line of Doom, because what you could do is, if you say had 2 rogues on your team, you could do this effectively. You would, as long as your rogue was near another player, they could get the flanking bonus, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it would be like enemy player rogue, enemy player rogue. Like, it was this lineup of just how you would line up the enemies and the players and everything, and you would obviously play to get them into that position. But it became the Conga Line of Doom. It was like, all right, you're gonna do your flanking backstab, and then you're gonna fall back to the end of the line, and then you're gonna do your flanking backstab, and you're gonna fall back to the end of the line.
Okay, I see what. Yeah. Because there was that weird thing with movement and stuff involved in flanking and 3, 5, and fourth, and
Yeah, it's not dogging on them. It's just a fact of how those were played.
right. No, and see, that's the thing is, I think so many times, because maybe it's because there's that perception that combat drags. We don't role play combat because we think that's time that's just going to make it longer. And I wonder if you do take the time to role play combat, even if it does make it chronologically longer, does it feel shorter because you're paying attention to what's happening? If you're not the one doing it, you're listening to this person describe this thing they're doing and then going, oh, well, then I can do this thing to kind of feed off what they did, and maybe, well, I'm not going to actually get an attack, but I'm going to pick up this vase and chuck it across the room at the bad guy to distract him. And then that gets into the whole thing of, well, is there a mechanical effect to that? Well, not in most systems. I think, Genesis handles that well with, maybe you do that by, an advantage and it passes a boost die or something like that. But yeah, like, I don't know, like you said, it just, like I said, I don't know the answer to this, but it seems like just lining up and slogging it out reduces it to math, and I don't play RPGs for math.
I agree. I agree and disagree. I don't know. Some of the fun is the numbers.
And we all like seeing big numbers. That's the other thing, right? Like, there's that satisfaction of, I rolled a 27 to hit. That feels good. You get a big number on your damage roll. Feels good. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, and there's different mindsets in gaming, and some players are skill based where they prefer, oh well, maybe I didn't roll a big number, but I was able to outwit the enemy that I'm attacking.
Mm-hmm.
And some people want to roll the big number, and big number shiny and nice.
Well, I think, going off of that though, I think people are hesitant to do things that there isn't a statistical judgment for in combat situations. But I think some of that maybe also is fed by the fact that most of the time it ends up being a fight to the death.
I think sometimes what the problem really boils down to, and I'll just say this, and I'm making a bold statement here, but I think the problem really boils down to people are afraid to do things that aren't listed in the book.
Mm-hmm.
And rather than being like, let's try it anyways. So, all right, here's a perfect example of this. Remember when we first tried Genesis and we were both like, I don't know what I can do,
Mm-hmm.
because we had both come off of 5th edition and been like, oh yeah, or Cyberpunk even, and been like, I have a defined set of skills. I know exactly what I can do.
Mm-hmm.
And Genesis doesn't. Like, they do. You have your talents, and yeah, there's some of those you can use in combat and such, but your Genesis talents aren't like swing the sword.
Right.
So you sort of get in this situation where you're like, I don't know, what can I do? And yeah, a GM, first time player is going to walk you through, well, you have a lot of options. You can do what you think is thematically correct. But I think some of the time people are afraid to be like, you know what, the book doesn't say I can do this, but I'm just going to do it anyways and see if the GM will work with me. Or try and describe a thing that you're trying to do and then be like, how can we make this work? Well, in most cases, and I think this is something we get caught up in the rules a lot of the time, and especially in combat, combat rules are like, oh yeah, you would think a lot of the time combat rules are the Bible, and it's like, well, I want to try and like throw that trash can lid at him and distract him, and I don't really care if I do any damage. It's more of just I want to get his eyes on me and off my friend.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there's no like in Dungeons and Dragons, if we're throwing lids off of barrels, there's no rules. I guess, you have rules for like improvised weapon, but you explicitly said you don't want to do any damage, you're just trying to distract. So now you're sort
Right.
of going, I guess make me or I guess make me a dexterity check, and you can't be afraid to be like, I'm going to flip this mattress over and distract the hell out of them.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think that
Steve.
comes. That was in Genesis, not D&D.
I know, but it's still the same idea. What talent did you use to flip mattress? I don't know of any flip mattress talent.
I think I argued for athletics. I don't remember.
I don't remember what you argued for, but
But I think too, this is a thing where if you're running the game, be open to doing this with your players and maybe even do it a little bit to try and prompt them with your NPCs. Have, like you said, if it's a fantasy game, maybe there's this goblin in a corner that's just, you know, chucking rotten chicken eggs at somebody. You know what I mean? Like, it's not doing damage, but have it have some sort of effect. Disadvantage seems extreme to me, but maybe not. I don't know.
you're distracted.
Distracted. Exactly.
You're distracted. That's exactly what disadvantage is like you're looking the wrong direction and something is coming at you.
And maybe, like I said, if you do that with your bad guys, if you're the GM, maybe that can spur your players to go, oh, that's fun. Let's do some of that too. And I think, and I'm gonna kind of probably make a hard left turn here, but I think the other thing is maybe don't always make the fight, like I said a minute ago, to the death. Maybe it's something, and this was a point that I thought was really, really neat when we were talking with pacing with Justin Eacock, where he was talking about the giant fight. He has that one adventure. He just runs it till he wants it to be over.
Yeah.
He's not actually tracking the hit points. Maybe, think of your fight as so to speak, a timer, and you want to get it to achieve this certain balance point, and then it ends because they all just up and run away, or whatever. If you think about it, most of the time, who really wants to stay in a fight until you lose permanently? No, you're going to try and get away. Now, D&D, then you have the attack of opportunity mechanics and all that other stuff, but
I think one of the things that people forget about is I've heard a lot of arguments recently, people talking about, oh, when is it okay to just run? Yes. The answer is yes. It's okay to run at any point.
mhm.
If you feel you can't win a combat, it's okay.
Yeah, and see, this is where sometimes I think we get too caught up in mechanics, right? Because at that point, then it comes down to the chase rules, which in D&D are a pain in the ass, and the speed thing makes it virtually impossible to have a meaningful chase if you're just doing it turn-based. Mechanically, D&D's chase rules are basically, I don't wanna say useless, but
The hindrance that keeps people from running.
yeah, D&D's chase rules, I mean, mechanically, they don't really do much because everyone's speed is more or less the same, or in a group context, it is almost definitely gonna be the same. So, I think at that point, maybe this is where you have to, or I think it's more interesting, I shouldn't say have to. I think it's more interesting if maybe you bend the rules, and maybe you don't literally drop out of initiative, but maybe you go to, like, some sort of like a skill challenge thing, and you take some of your effects more narrative. Maybe, your one of your casters uses, like, the gust cantrip to slow the guy down in front or knock him off balance, so maybe he trip, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
technically, I think that will move, excuse me, I think technically that spell will move somebody 5 feet. Well, that's not really interesting. to me, it's the same thing to, so to speak, knock him down as it would be to move him 5 feet, give or take, in this context anyway, right? So maybe you knock him down, and that's a way that you get a little bit further away from the whole crew, because now they're climbing over the guy that was first in line, or whatever, maybe, like I said, you don't technically break out of initiative, but break out of that hyper structured thing, because that structure is, while it makes it equitable on the combat grid, it's not fun to, it's just not fun if you're trying to do a chase that way or anything like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I
Like, if you've got two characters moving 30 feet, and here again we go back to that turn argument that, well, you go 30 feet and then he goes 30 feet. And so you're alternating between 10 and 40 feet apart, depending on who goes first. Unless something happens and one of you loses a turn, and then, da 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 da. Well, I don't know. That, to me, that's boring.
it is boring. It I don't know.
I think the skill challenge concept I think that originally started maybe in 4th edition, but I know it's used heavily by a lot of people in the Genesis system. We've all, those that listen to Critical Role or watch it, Mercer uses it quite a bit. I think that's a kind of a great, what do you want to say, breakup mechanic to use, if your group wants to make a more narrative move kind of immediately out of a combat. And I think that's the thing, is maybe we should just stop treating combat as such a sacred cow.
Yeah, that's where I'm at. I think part of the problem is that I hear a lot of people go, well, you just don't be afraid to run from a combat. But the fact of the matter is that, like 5th edition, it's really, really hard to wipe a party in combat. And so you get into a situation where it's like, oh, we're gonna run from this combat, but like full well knowing that the paladin at any point has access. Well, not at any point, but the paladin at a certain point has access to any number of bring you back spells or healings readily available, or it's just these things that, like, I just can't. I don't understand. You want to encourage people to run, but at the same time you're sort of like, well, here's all these things to stay and fight, and I think that's a fault with the system.
Well,
because like in Genesis, if you're way over your head, running is an option and there's no penalty to do that. But in 5th edition, running is not an option, and well, running is an option, but there is a major penalty to do that.
Yeah, I understand the why of it from a simulationist aspect, because if you turn to run, the other person, you're, so to speak, giving up that defensive side of the dance we mentioned before, right? So that is going to give the other person involved with you, that the other person you're fighting with, an opening to get a quality swing at you, for lack of a better way to say it. So I understand why the rule is there. I don't know. It's like this weird thing where the rules are getting in the way of the story, and to me, the story should trump the rules. But I know not everybody feels that way.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It's kind of strange.
Kind of strange is right. It's a hard thing to quantify.
Yeah, I think that's the key of it, right? And like, look, there's a zillion ways. I think the biggest thing to make it more interesting is figure out ways to keep the people whose turn it is not currently involved somehow. Be that, adapting the Genesis slot initiative system to any other system.
Yeah.
Which I just wanted to briefly explain that if we've got anyone listening that hasn't checked out Genesis, the way it works, and while it's the same one that's used in the FFG Star Wars, but when you go to start combat, everyone rolls initiative, and that just determines, based on whether it was a PC or an NPC who rolled the given number, any one of either category can take any one of those action slots. Just because the rogue rolled the highest doesn't mean he has to go first, but he could. But if the cleric needs to heal someone, he could take that slot, or vice versa, or any sort of, and it changes every round. You don't re-roll, but anyone, your character could go first one round and last the next.
Yeah. What I was going to say is, I think one of the ways to keep players engaged in combat outside of their turn is, and this isn't always possible, but have your big bad talk to your players. Like, even when it's not their turn, like if it's after he's taken a hit, after they've taken a hit, after they've taken damage, whatever they're fighting, let it be like a conversation,
Well, okay, just for example, I don't know why this popped into my head, but the clifftop duel scene in The Princess Bride,
Right.
all the banter that goes up back and forth between those two during that scene. And look, I'm not going to hold that up as an example of a great fight scene or a great dialogue or a great movie, but it's beautiful if you think of it as an RPG session played out in film.
Yeah. It's one of those things where you got to sort of keep the flow and the banter and the fun going, and keeping your players engaged during combat is really important, because that's where most of the players are going to sit. They're going to play on their phone, and you're going to have the power gamers that are super invested and want to make sure that they do exactly the right move. But you know your narrative players are going to sit there and be like, I don't care, whatever happens. Did we win? We won. Oh, good.
Well, I think this is too, though, where, and this got touched on in last week's episode, talking with Dustin about whether you use maps or not. Don't be afraid. You and I have played together. You know how many times I'll ask an off the wall question about, well, is there this in the room?
Right.
And it's not that the thing that I'm asking about is ridiculous.
No, it's a realistic thing you want in a room. It's just you want to know if it's there or not, if the GM says it's there or not.
And so many times the response that you'll hear at a table is, I don't know, it doesn't really say in the book. Who gives a crap what the book says?
Just give me a yes or no.
Like, and that this goes both ways, right? Add silly little things to the room, be it, there's a busted up chair in this corner of the room, and maybe it doesn't show on the map, whatever. Don't I mean, maybe if your group wants to play really super tactical with maps and grid and everything else, yeah, you want to build that room to represent exactly the playground that they're playing in.
Yeah.
But I think it's more fun if you let your players have that license to say, well, hey, is there a busted up chair in the corner of this room in this old dungeon that we're in? Or busted up table, whatever. Just, because most of the time they have an idea of something that they think is cool they want to do. And basically all they're asking you for is the ingredients to make the fun with.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like, for lack of a better way to say it, I mean, make all the fun you can.
I think my thing is always, and I'll say this. We talk about yes and, but it should be no but. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
If you ask, is there a chair in this room? And I go, no, but there is a chandelier. Okay. All right. I can work with that. You know what I mean? Is there a
Right.
chair in this room? Yes, and it's all busted down. Oh, cool. I need a chair leg. Right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
it's yes and no but. And I think that's something that we just get.
Like I said, I wonder if some of it is because we think that, or maybe it's because we all kind of dread that point in the game when we're waiting for it to be our turn.
Mm-hmm.
We try to get through our turn quickly, as like an empathetic thing of, we don't want everyone else waiting. Well, it's our turn. And
Right.
don't take this the wrong way, because I think it's good practice to try and be prepared for your turn so that, you're not spending 10 minutes looking through something to look up this specific spell or, whatever. But I think if we remember to role play while we're having combat, it's probably going to make the game more fun for everybody in net.
Oh yeah, I think remembering to role play during combat is going to make combat more entertaining for the people who aren't interested in it, and it's going to make combat more entertaining for the people who are deep into it.
Yeah, because I think even if you're introducing these narrative elements that, like you said, a chair, a chandelier, whatever, now some of these the more tactical players, they're going to try and figure out a way to use that as a tactical advantage.
Right.
And yeah, it's just like stuff like that. I don't know. I've also been, for me, it's always been kind of those things where I've always tried to do something different, right? Like I remember first D&D game I ever played was an old Dark Sun campaign, the original Dark Sun modules. And I was playing my character, and it was actually a character I took over from someone. I didn't make the character myself. It was what they called a mule gladiator, which was this, well, really not too far off of what's now a Goliath in 5th edition, but big muscle bound specialty fighter, we'll call it.
Right.
And you know this, but back in the days of 2nd edition, there were weapon proficiencies were a big thing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, one of the things that my character was this mule gladiator, which was like a pit fighter, but as a class feature, they were automatically proficient with all weapons, including improvised. So I was constantly doing less than normal things. Like the one time we got attacked by this, like, I think they were called bog monsters or something. They were like in this mud hole that was out in the middle of some desert somehow, or I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But they've got all these spines coming out of them. And so my DM tells me, "Oh, this thing clamps onto your leg, and it's like kind of basically bear hugging your leg and trying to get work its spines that are like on its chest and its arms into your leg." And I'm like, "Well, okay." I said, "Well, does it have spines coming out the side of his head?" And he kind of looks at me, goes, "Oh, sure, I guess so." I said, "Okay." So my turn. I'm like, "Can I just like corkscrew his head using the spines as handles?" And he kind of looked at me. And it was, like you say, it was one of those, he goes, "Well, yeah, I don't see why not." And that's like you said, that's kind of the yes and whatever, because, okay, yes, I was asking that question with full intent of, well, if it has handles, I'm going to twist it, but it also stands to reason, would this creature have that? You know what I mean?
Right.
Otherwise, what am I going to try and do? Pummel it with my hands? You can't really swing a sword at your own leg. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know if that, in my mind, that relates somehow. I'm just not sure exactly where I was going. Got lost in my own story.
Thematic combat.
Yeah. So, like, and at the same time, if you think of it in the context, if you're watching a movie or reading a book, and this thing grabs onto the protagonist's leg, well, trying, and character was extremely strong. So that's kind of a thing that, in my mind, like, I could see that happening in like a Conan movie, right?
Right.
Just felt right in the moment, and my DM went with it. And I think, that's the stuff that, well, okay, see, I would have been maybe 19 when that happened, and
Mm-hmm.
I still remember it. So, it stuck with me. I think that's half the point, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Keeping combat thematic is a big thing to keep combat entertaining. It just is, and I think a lot of people forget. That's why people get bored during combat, is because it's like, oh well, swing the sword and I'm gonna make my attack and I'll move on from there, and hopefully this will be over in a round or two, and not having a conversation or doing shenanigans. I think that's another thing, is that shenanigans need to happen in combat too.
Yeah.
Like, you want to do fun, silly things. Do fun, silly things in combat, out of combat, before combat, after combat. When appropriate. But like, do goofy things in combat. What's the difference? What's the worst that's going to happen? You're going to lose. Okay. What's that mean? What does it mean to lose a combat? And
Maybe
is
that's
losing is that a bad thing? Like, maybe that changes the story dynamic. Maybe that makes it a more interesting thing.
right.
That's like, to be like, oh, we're gonna lose combat because of you. Well, no, I did a fun thing, you know.
Yeah, well, see, to me, and again, I won't say that this is the right way to play, but to me, the win state for a game is when I leave the table at the end of the night and I had a good time.
Yes.
And that I say that as a player and as a GM, not only did I have a good time, but did the people that are playing with me have a good time.
Yeah. My best stories come out of everybody losing their mind at the table and walking away going, "Oh man, that's a fantastic game. Like that was so much fun."
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's, yeah, I mean, heck, some of my best gaming stories, my fondest gaming memories are from basically wipes.
Yeah.
Because stuff just went sideways, and every time you turned it, the hole you were trying to fit in it turned too.
You're
Talking about the Delta Green one shot?
no, the Home Alone one shot you ran.
Oh, okay.
That was basically a comedy of errors. Like everybody was botching rolls that night.
Mm-hmm. But
And it
that just
turned
fit.
out so fun.
Well, that's, you know what, that's the other thing I did in that, and you were there. I made up the splitting kobold thing on the spot.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Y'all seem to have a good time with it, though.
Oh, it was a blast. It was a blast. But yeah, it's the sometimes doing the wrong thing in combat is fine. Do it, please. Because does it make sense for your character? If the answer is yes, then do it. Now that's not saying always, but most of the time if that's the case, then go for it. In combat, what's the difference? Like I said, what are you going to do? Lose combat? Like, so you have a party wipe and a whole excuse to make a new character and to tell a different story and to have more fun, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I think sometimes maybe, all of us are a little too precious with our characters. And I'm not saying it's wrong to not want your character to die.
Well, I think about it this way. Think about Morkborg, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's sort of the point of Morkborg is like, all right, well, everybody's gonna die. And we're gonna make new characters. We're gonna do this again and see what happens. Or we're gonna tell a different story. Or we're gonna, continue on the path of the world is ending. And there's nothing you can do that could ever stop that. And that's the fun of Morkborg. Like it's dark and gritty and grim, but it's everybody walks out having a good time because there's consequence, but there's no consequence.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes in Dungeons and Dragons we need to remember that there's consequences for failing, but at the end of the day, maybe your party wasn't the party to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that leaves you up to tell a story later on that's like, all right, well, we're going to try and do this again, but this time, everybody's going to be like super skeptical because the last group of people really botched this. Like they dropped the ball hard.
Well, and then, maybe you continue the same story, but you make a new band of characters that goes out looking for where these wandering heroes went off to.
Right. All right, your job is to find where our hired guns went to.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I mean, this already, but still, you could try and finish the job.
Yeah, and like I said, I'm just throwing that out there, not saying that it's the right solution every time, but
Yeah, there's fun things you can do when you fail.
mm-hmm. Heck, half the time failure is more interesting than success.
I like to see it sometimes more than success. Success means that we're doing, I don't know.
Success means it went as you planned it.
Yeah.
Failure means we got to make some stuff up.
We got to make new plans. But
all right.
Well, I think that was a very productive conversation around combat.
I think so too.
And I think it's time for Game of the Week.
Ooh, Game of the Week.
Game of the Week. Game of the Week.
All right.
You going first or am I going first?
You want to go first?
Oh, I can. A or B, Steve?
B, Steve.
All right. So my Game of the Week this week is going to be one that's actually, and I know we've got some listeners with kids, this is actually a game designed for kids. It's from Atlas Games, and it is called Magical Kitties Save the Day. You are cute. You are cunning. You are fierce. You are magical kitties, and it's time to save the day. Every kitty has a human. Every human has a problem. And in this game, you use your magical powers to solve your human's problems. And so this is a game actually completely designed for kids as young as 6, and it is designed to be able to be run by kids, heavily focused on storytelling. I believe all the dice rolls are player facing. It's actually currently in its 2nd edition as well. And Atlas Games isn't a huge publisher, but you should be able to find them in a lot of places. You can obviously get the PDF on DriveThruRPG. It's about $15, but it's got some kind of, the artwork looks kind of, I don't know, obviously kid oriented, right? But like, I don't know what media to say it references, but I can see a style to it that I recognize.
Yeah, I can get behind that. Well, my game is not kid friendly. My game is called Red Giant.
Okay.
And it's a tabletop role-playing game influenced but not limited to anime and manga such as Vampire Hunter D, Berserk, Claymore, and it aims to create various themes, dynamics, and scenarios seen in these type of media. So it's supposed to be a bleak and sort of dark, empty world, and it's a flavor I haven't really seen in tabletop games in a while. It is, like I said, a bleak game, so very much like a lot of the taglines are like, you cannot save the world, and telling stories of like, nobody knows how the Red Giant came to be, but some people believe it to be an act of God, some believe it due to ancient technology. But no matter how this planet became cursed, it's this, like I said, just the artwork is black and white with a little bit of red, and it's just a lot of emptiness, a lot of bleakness, a lot of giants. It's so neat.
I would say there's a
Interesting.
space on the pages that they're showing in the listing, and like you said, I think that's intentional because it creates that feel.
Right. It's supposed to feel empty. And it's definitely definitely interesting and definitely something to check out if you like that type of, like I said, Vampire Hunter D or Berserk, where it's very bleak media, very anime, very manga. But yeah, it's so cool. I've had this on my radar, and I was like, well, I can't think of a game, and then I was like, well, Red Giant's been on my radar. So
Cool.
yeah. And with that, I want to thank everybody for listening. As always, links to everything are in the show notes. Patreon, me and Steve talk RPGs at patreon.com. And that's linked in the show notes.
Yeah.
And we will remind you to be kind to one another and get out there and play some RPGs.
Thanks for listening. Take care, y'all.
Intro and outro music by the band 12 Noon. You can email us at meandsteverpg@gmail.com. You can find us on Twitter at @RPGs. Find us on Facebook at Me and Steve RPG Podcast. On Discord at Me and Steve RPGs. And as always, all of these links are in the show notes. Thank you, and be kind to one another.
How much for the cigar?
Cigar, $20, dog. You gotta go down the street to the store and buy that.
Now recording.
Oh my god, there's 16 of them now.
Just 2.
I heard 4 different now recordings. It's like we plan things. Like, no, we don't plan shit around here. I had it backwards. It was almost Istanbul again.
That's nobody's business but the Turks.
Yeah. I think it is actually Istanbul right now. I don't know why I know that.
Yeah.
There was talk that it was going to be there was talk of changing it back to Constantinople.
Okay.
And I was like, why? What? And I got the response of, it's nobody's business but the Turks. I'm like, I guess. All right, I'm ready to go whenever you are.